Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jessica Martinez, and I serve as the co-executive director at the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health, also known as National COSH for short. We are a national and growing network of 25 local health and safety coalitions or COSH groups. Our affiliates across the United States support workers who are standing up to win safer working conditions. We're here today to release the 2023 list of Dirty Dozen unsafe employers. This is part of our observance of Workers' Memorial Week, which takes place this year from April 23rd through April 30th. It's a time to honor workers who have become sick, injured, or lost their lives on the job, and to renew our fight to win safer workplaces for all workers. So in today's agenda, I will begin with introducing the Dirty Dozen. We'll have 4 panelists who can give firsthand accounts about what's happening at these companies. And then we'll have questions from journalists on the call and answers from our panelists, moderated by my colleague, Melissa Moriarty. Just as a reminder, we do have some folks attending today's session who are health and safety advocates and members of our affiliate groups. We're delighted to have you with us. But as a reminder, the Q&A portion of this program is exclusive for journalists on the call today. So it's now time to announce the Dirty Dozen for 2023. We select the Dirty Dozen based on nominations from our network of health and safety activists, including members of unions, workers' centers, and local COSH groups. The National COSH team evaluates these nominations based on criteria that include the severity of injuries to workers, the position of an employer within its industry and community, and efforts by workers to win safer working conditions. I think most of our journalist friends have now received an advance copy of the report, and it's also available on our website at nationalcosh.org. We'll also share it through the chat today. Here are the companies we've identified this year in alphabetical order. So first we have Amazon on this list, which is on the list for the 4th time. Nothing to be proud of, a great deal of evidence of continued fatalities and injuries. We also have FedEx, the shipping giant, a preventable death in Memphis, and injuries and fatalities on the rise throughout the company. Hanover Company, Lithco Contracting, and Friends Masonry Construction, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. 3 Latino workers dead after a scaffolding collapse. We have Norfolk Southern and all the Class 1 freight railroads. So-called precision scheduled railroading is hazardous for workers and communities. We'll hear from a railway union leader in just a few minutes. We also have Occidental Chemical, Westlake Chemical Companies still using asbestos despite 40,000 deaths a year. Packer Sanitation Service, Inc., PSSI, JBS Foods, Cargill, and Tyson for exploiting child labor in hazardous meat packing plants. We have Sonoma Wise, a growers organization in California, wine country, fighting against farm workers who are organizing for protections from extreme weather events. We'll hear from a farm worker shortly. We also have Swissport International AG companies who have a history of safety violations. We'll hear soon from a Swissport worker. We have Tenet Healthcare Corporation, one of the nation's largest hospital chains, cutting corners on worker and patient safety. Tesla Inc., and its giant gigafactory in Austin, Texas, where construction workers got fake certificates instead of real safety training. We have Trulieve Cannabis Corporation. We'll hear shortly from a sister cousin of Lorna McMurray, a worker who died from an asthma attack after inhaling cannabis dust. And we finally have Twin Peaks Restaurant in Brentwood, Tennessee, and around the country, a chain with a business model that is based on sexual harassment. These are the Dirty Dozen of 2023. Of course, you want the details about why each company was named. You can find a brief version in our press release and the full details in our Dirty Dozen if you don't have them already. Both are available on our website, nationalcosh.org. So before we introduce our panelists, I want to provide some quick background on the alarming trends we are seeing that affect U.S. workers. There were 5,190 deaths from sudden trauma in the U.S. workplaces in 2021. The rate of these fatalities, 3.6 deaths for every 100,000 workers, is higher than it was 5 years ago. The rate of workplace injuries is also increasing, and the number of children illegally employed in hazardous industries is also on the rise. We are also seeing the effects of corporate greed and racism. Black and brown workers are dying on the job at higher rates than other workers, with Latino and Latina workers facing the greatest risk. Why? Because for far too long, these workers have been assigned the dirtiest and most dangerous jobs, and we can't ignore the impact of our broken immigration system. 2/3 of the 11 million undocumented workers in the US are from Mexico and Central America, and it is these vulnerable workers who are often most at risk from unsafe work practices. And that's the bad news. The good news is that workers are not waiting around to get hurt or get killed. Workers are standing up for safety, health, and justice. They're joining with the Kosh Network, building powerful health and safety committees, pressing for strong enforcement and demanding safe conditions and a union. We're going to hear about some of these actions from our panelists, so let's get started. First, we're going to hear from Anabel Garcia. Anabel is a farm worker from Sonoma County in California. Anabel, ¿estás ahí?
Sí, buenos días, aquí estoy.
Yes, good morning, I'm here.
Bienvenida, y si nos puede dar su
Welcome. Can you give us your testimony, please? What has your experience been like working in Sonoma County?
Mi cámara no se abre, pero me gustaría que
I can't turn my camera on. I would like to turn my camera on, though.
Mire, yo he trabajado aquí
Good
en
morning.
el condado de Sonoma.
I've worked in Sonoma County for 20 years now.
Es Anabel García.
My name is
He
Anabel
trabajado
Garcia.
por 15 años en los viñedos de California.
I've worked in the vineyards for 15 years until the wildfires in 2017. That was a horrible experience. We had to pick grapes with the smoke until the owners told us that they didn't want smoky grapes. Then we had to continue working to be able to pay. We had to do cleaning of the offices. We had to clean homes. We had to clean homes that were covered
Cuando empezó la
in
pandemia,
dust.
tuve que regresar al campo. Era el único trabajo
Then
que
during the
tenía.
pandemic, I had to go back to work in the fields. It was the only work that we had. So they were using pesticides and we would show up at work. There are a lot of injustices that we face. I called the labor center of Brayton and sent a photo of the company where I was working because they didn't want to move us, even though the tractor was spraying pesticides right next to us. At the same time, my coworkers, my fellow workers, we were working in extreme heat. We were yelling and moved into the shade, but they almost fainted. And they never called an ambulance. They never provided first aid. We had to go to the hospital. There are a lot of injustices that we face with the employers. You know, just to have a roof over our heads, to be able to pay for food for our children. We are exposed. We are working under the rain. We are working in extreme weather conditions. We've experienced so many different things. And the organization that has supported us up till now is Work with Justice. We have gone to the county, we've asked for support, and we won $3 million. And we started to organize in the county because everyone has the H-2A visa. We are working under these conditions, but they leave and we stay working under these conditions. They prefer to give jobs to people with the H-2A visa. And people who live luckily are suffering. People who live in Sonoma County are suffering, and we can't figure out where to work. Right now, I am doing garden work and I clean houses. But I still have a lot of needs. I still have a lot of needs to survive in this country, but we are fighting to receive benefits. We're fighting to be respected. We want them to pay us time and a half during disasters, during natural disasters. And we need them to give us 1 or 2 weeks of income when there's a natural disaster. And we shouldn't be having to ask for this because we are human beings and we deserve to have rights. It doesn't matter what country we come from. We need everyone who drinks a glass of wine to know that this comes from our work. It comes from the work of the immigrant community. And you should know that you are drinking wine that comes from the sweat of a worker, and a worker that is exposed to all sorts of weather conditions, to all sorts of emergencies. And I thank you who are doing this work and who are listening to everyone and who are honoring the people who have lost their lives. We will continue fighting in this country. We will continue fighting for our benefits and for our rights. We will continue organizing our fellow workers and working with the county and all of the community workers who are supporting us. I don't know if you have any questions for me or anything like that. Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you so much for your testimony. And above all, for your bravery and for continuing to organize with your fellow workers. We're going to leave questions until the end. So if you have some time, we'll ask for your patience. Thank you so much again.
All right, wonderful. So that was Annabelle. Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Vince Verba, who serves as the Vice President and National Legislative Representative for the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, or BLET. Vince?
Hi, thank you. My name is Vince Verna with an N, V-E-R-N-A, and I am the Vice President and National Legislative Representative for the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. We are part of the Teamsters. We have a very rich history. We were founded in 1863, a few weeks before the Gettysburg Address. So we've been part of the American fabric since around the time of the Civil War. So I really am very proud to represent our members, and they work very hard every day, bringing all of the goods that all of us enjoy in life. We have a saying that if you bought it, we brought it, because we move every type of product you can think of through the railroad system in America, including passenger rail at Amtrak and other commuter and intercity passenger trains. But primarily today, we're focused on freight rail and the Class 1 railroads, which I was a locomotive engineer for 18 years in the cab. All of our union officers at BLET proudly come from the rank and file. One of the things we've been fighting over the past few years that has really made our workers' lives much worse is precision scheduled railroading, or PSR as it's called. It's an economic sort of business model that is like just basically hyper cost cutting by the railroads. And they've been not just cutting costs, but through cutting costs, they're cutting corners on safety, and fighting common sense safety regulations. And that's where we are trying to fight so hard to get back on track with good safety regulations that make sense, like 2-person crew on a train, which is 1 certified locomotive engineer and 1 certified conductor in the cab of a locomotive. Long trains have been getting much longer. Some trains are stretching now to almost 5 miles long, if you can believe that, a 5-mile long train. So we really want to see these things change and start teaming up with the railroads. We would like to see and help them get off of the Dirty Dozen list. We don't want to work for a company on the Dirty Dozen list. We really want to make sure that changes. And their reaction during PSR has been really amoral at best and immoral at worst. And we want to remind people that, treating your workers right and doing the safest thing and not fighting safety regulations and having a profitable railroad are not mutually exclusive. You can do both. And that's what we're trying to accomplish at the railroad. 79% of people in the private industry have paid sick leave, but that's not true on the railroads. Locomotive engineers and trainmen do not have paid sick leave. And so we, don't feel like we should be penalized for trying to go to the doctor when we're sick. We don't feel like we should be penalized if we wake up with COVID or strep throat or anything else, that we're not forced to go to work all hours of the day and night on call when we are ill. So we really are calling on the railroads and we're calling on Congress to pass a law if necessary. To
quick point that I wanted to make to you.
sorry,
So this is a trick I learned a few weeks ago.
1
which is
second,
really
Vince, we're
helpful.
gonna make sure we mute.
So
Hear
I'm in
you.
your informan.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, I didn't know if I was getting feedback or something. So we're calling on the railroads and Congress, if necessary, to provide at least seven paid sick days a year, or more if it's negotiated more. And we don't want to have to trade away any of our hard-won benefits for our pay or for vacation time that we've won over since 1863, just to be able to take a day off when we're sick. So, that's really what we're trying to do. Like I said, we don't want to work for a company that is on a dirty dozen list. We want to work for a company who's puts their employees' interests at heart and knows that isn't that doesn't conflict with having a good business and a profitable business. So thanks for your time and listening to me. And I can stick around if someone has questions after.
Thank you so much, Vince. As you said, safety is a good business model, and we hope that that's what several on this list can learn to, again, prioritize. And thanks for your testimony. If you can hold, and we'll have Q&A shortly. I want to now hear from Carl Rothenhaus, who's a worker at Swissport, the airport service company. Carl.
Hello, everybody. Hope you can hear me. My name is Carl Rothenhaus. I'm a Swissport cargo office agent at Boston Logan International Airport in Massachusetts. Worked at the airport for a little over a year now. In my role, I work to make sure that cargo gets to where it needs to go, and the paperwork for each shipment is in order so shipments can depart on time. We move life-saving medical supplies in and out of the airport all the time, including life-saving organs and blood that people rely on. It's really important work, and I really take pride in being part of the process of getting these life-saving things to where they need to go. Despite working at one of the busiest airports in the country, we're facing, and we're also facing increases in the amount of cargo we ship every single day. We are understaffed, and workers have had to use really problematic forklifts to do their jobs, and they were just recently replaced. For months, I had watched my coworkers use forklifts that were not properly maintained and had tires that were old and cracking. Sometimes forklifts would just shut off unexpectedly. How safe would you feel if you're working on a forklift and the crate you were holding that was 2,000 pounds suddenly got stuck 10 feet in the air? It's a huge safety hazard and put a lot of my coworkers' lives in danger. Safety has been a big issue at the Boston airport. According to analysis of OSHA 300 reports, Swissport at Boston has had an injury rate over 2 times higher than the industry average, even just as recently as 2021. And still, Swissport didn't take any action to replace those forklifts until my coworkers filed an OSHA complaint back in November of 2022. It shouldn't take an OSHA complaint for Swissport or any employer to do the right thing and make sure their workers are safe. Not only was this a safety issue, it also impacted our ability to do our jobs. These forklifts would break down, and then people would be scrambling to move cargo with not enough forklifts and not enough people to work on those forklifts. And so, shipments wouldn't go out on time, especially if there were life-saving things. It's a big deal. Swissport should be embarrassed to be on this list. I wholly agree with Mr. Verna. Nobody wants to work at a dirty dozen company. People depend on us, and yet don't have what we need to do our jobs, and safety isn't prioritized. Without airport service workers, cargo wouldn't move, passengers wouldn't fly, and our airports just wouldn't function. Swissport needs to step up and stop contributing to the ongoing crisis in the air transport system. What they should do is invest in their service workers to make air travel possible, but we can't wait for them to act as well. That's why we're joining airport service workers nationwide and speaking out and organizing to form a union. It's because of companies like Swissport, we're also taking our demands for good jobs and good union jobs to Congress and urging them to pass the Good Jobs for Good Airports Act, which is introduced just early in March. This legislation would set wage and benefit standards for the majority Black, brown, and immigrant workforce that makes air travel possible. Working people everywhere from all races and backgrounds deserve a seat at the table, living wages, and respect and dignity on the job. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Carl. And as you said, I do agree that we are here as advocates, not only asking for safer jobs, it's really a comprehensive approach to living wages, quality jobs, and every worker needs to come home safe and healthy. So thank you so much for joining us and for your powerful testimony. I'm going to have our final panelist before we go to Q&A. It's Alicia Bounds. She is the sister cousin of Lorna McMurray, but they grew up together. So Alicia tells us Lorna was more like her sister. Alicia?
Hello, good morning. I'm in California, so it's morning here. Yeah, my cousin started working for Trulieve back in 2020, and she started, I think, at about May. And so she was there for about 2 months, couple months, and in around July of 2020, Trulieve ended up taking away the PPE. So she was working in what is called a Renaissance building. So they take old buildings that don't really have the best airflow, things that have asbestos, stuff like that. And they took away just the paper masks. And within a matter of 2 months, about 3 months, around November, she collapsed at work, and she was regularly begging her stepdad for respirators from his work because he's a welder, so just to breathe. And she had no pre-existing asthmatic conditions or anything, but over the last couple of months after they took away the PPE, she started to develop breathing problems, and she wound up being carted out by an ambulance on November 9th of 2020. And she went to the hospital where they told her she had some sort of asthmatic condition developed they couldn't diagnose what it was. And she went back to work. And around January 2021, she collapsed a second time at work, and she never made it home. She ended up having an asthmatic heart attack and was carted out to the hospital. Was pronounced brain dead 4 days later. So the entire thing was completely preventable in terms of they took away just paper masks. She had no pre-existing conditions whatsoever. And then she developed she was a keef roller. So she was hired in the industry to grind up keef into pre-rolls. And after they took away the protective equipment, which was just basically paper mask, from inhaling cannabis dust and whatever, disgusting quality conditions that she was in, she developed a rare form of asthma, which ended up costing her life. It was completely a preventable situation. She should still be here. Her 28th birthday was a month later, and she planned on coming out and, seeing her family for the first time in 16 years. But the month before, she ended up collapsing a second time, and we never got to see her again.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for your words. I'm sorry to hear again for your sister cousin. at such a young age. Again, as you said, such preventable situations, and time again shows that most of these hazardous conditions are preventable. So again, we're all thinking today about your family and about Lorna, who was taken from you far too soon. So I just want to say that that's a wrap for our panelists and presentations. Thanks so much to our panelists for sharing your stories. We're now going to move to the Q&A portion of our program, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Melissa Moriarty. Melissa.
Hi, thank you, everyone, and thank you to all the speakers. We'll now take questions from the journalists on this call. So if you're a journalist and you have a question, please raise your hand either physically or using the Zoom feature down at the bottom of your screen. And once I call on you, please specify who your question is for and unmute yourself. If you'd like, you can also put your questions in the chat and I can read them out loud. Okay, so I see Mark Grunberg has a question. Mark, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I'm Mark Gruenberg from Press Associates Union News Service. First of all, my condolences to Alicia about your cousin. I mean, that, like you said, it's completely preventable. One question each for our first panelist and one for Mr. Verna. For our first panelist, you said that the tractor pulling the pesticides was right up beside the workers. Can you tell us basically what happened, and particularly if anybody was either transported to the hospital or died from inhaling the pesticides? And the second one, actually, it's not for Mr. Verna, it's for Carl. You said you're that one way you're combating what's going on at Swissport is to organizing, or organizing with whom? Which union? That's it.
Carl or Carl, if you'd like to answer first.
I believe the first question is for Anabel. Anabel está ahí, no sé si escuchó la pregunta.
Sí, aquí
Annabelle, are
estoy.
you there? I'm not sure if you heard the question. Yes, I am here. Can you please interpret for me?
Question slowly. Anabel, ¿está conectado a la interpretación?
No.
Annabelle, are you connected to the interpretation? And no worries. We'll clarify it for you.
It was a little unclear who it was
Do you want
for.
me to repeat the question?
Yes, please, one more time.
Okay. Annabelle said that there were workers working next to a tractor
Sí.
with pesticides. I want to know if any of the workers had to be transported to the hospital or treated, and God forbid, if any of them died.
Okay, Anabel, el compañero aquí quiere saber si alguno de sus...
Ese día hubo personas que estaban
That day, there were people who were suffering heat and just yelling that they were breathing in the chemicals, and one woman was about to faint and they did not bring her to the doctor. They just put her under the shade and they waited until 4 p.m. so that her ride came to pick her up. And that was negligence, because we shouldn't have to wait until somebody dies or for them to call an ambulance or for them to bring us to the doctor or to take the measures that they should take. It was 97 degrees that day and it's way too hot. And most of us have asthma and we have other kinds of illnesses because of so many chemicals that we've breathed in during the wildfires and from working in the fields. That woman never came back to that work. She was traumatized. She never came back to the job. And most employers don't support people. I had to call anonymously and I had to call the office to get them to move us to a new area. Thank you, Annabelle.
Great. And then I think the second question was directed at Carl.
Yeah, so we specifically in Swissport, at Swissport Boston, organizing with 32 BJ SEIU, but the national campaign for Good Jobs, Good Airports is a multiple union. Everybody's bunch of different unions, bunch of different organizations are fighting for it in Congress. So locally at 32 BJ SEIU, and then Good Jobs, Good Airports is being fought for by I think probably almost every union in the country that deals with airports.
Great. Thank you, Carl and Annabelle. Let's see, are there any other questions? Oh, I see something in the chat. Hi, this question is for Jessica. Would you mind elaborating on how these employers are selected? And that's from Alex Sarman.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question, which is an important one. So National Kosh has a network of over 26 local Kosh affiliates. We also have a growing network through our Protecting Workers Alliance. These are folks that are connected, whether they're on the ground, it's unions, local Kosh groups, workers centers, and so forth, that are connected to several employers, workers with these employers and so forth. There is a nomination process to ensure that where they detail the specifics of the employers, whether it's, consistency in injury rates, in workers being sick, in worker fatalities, and so forth. We receive these nominations, we assess based on their track record, based on data out there, OSHA complaints and OSHA, as well as after the investigations. And that's how we pretty much narrow it down to 12 of them, which are like the worst from a list of, again, we receive more than 12 and we choose the 12 based on injuries and again, worker complaining and organizing.
Great, thank you. I see another question in the chat from Joe. Sorry, let me just pull it up here. Senior editor at workbites.com. Does anyone here believe the companies on this list are embarrassed about being on it?
I think Alicia wants to answer.
From a Trulieve perspective, I don't think they're embarrassed whatsoever. They're too busy being not about worker safety. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen anything on the Young Jerks about what they do in Florida as well, but it seemed like they just don't care whatsoever. I mean, if they're making money, they don't really see anything as an issue. And that's just from a personal perspective from seeing what happened with my cousin.
Carl? Thank you, Alicia.
In terms of the air transport industry, Swissport, I think they care not as much as they should, but a little bit more than maybe other companies, just because the subcontractor market is incredibly competitive. If there's any sort of downtime or loss of time due to injuries, what companies will often do is, or the airlines will often do, is subcontract with a different company. So if they have a ridiculous amount of lost time due to injuries, it'll just, the workers actually will be okay, because often they'll go to the other company that the airline has gotten, that is hired to do the subcontracting work. But lost time due to injuries will actually cause loss of airline. They'll lose their contracts with the airlines. I have heard the conversations that it has been my subcontracting workers with United, and there's been times where we have been close to losing that contract just because of lost time, things like that, things not getting out on time. Things get to the point where we can't get things on time because we don't have enough people or workers because of safety issues. They'll lose the contract. And so they do care, but only as much as that they can keep the contract, not as much as that they keep the workers healthy.
And if I could chime in, I think the railroads, I can't speak for them, and I don't really know for sure if they're embarrassed or not, but I can say they do spend a lot of money on burnishing their images and trying to make their image great and on what I would categorize as institutional advertising. It's not saying anything other than look at us and how great we are, and it's really a constant mantra by them. So I don't think they would like the press shining a spotlight on them on what their deficiencies are with regard to how they treat their employees, their safety records, and any sort of injuries or deaths that occur. They don't want that highlighted. They want other things highlighted. So that's my perspective on how they might be feeling about some of this.
I absolutely agree with you, Vince.
Thank you, Vince. And Annabelle, what about you? ¿Crees que tu empleador está avergonzado de estar en esta lista?
Do you think that your employer is embarrassed to be on the list? Yes, can you hear me?
If you speak in English, she will understand it because she's hearing you. on the-
Sí, de hecho ellos comentan que porque yo he tratado de
Yes, because I have tried to talk about the workers' needs. There are a lot of wine workers who work in the fields, and I've raised my voice on their behalf. I think that the conditions that we work in and day out in the richest country in the world are worse.
Okay, gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you.
All right, next question from Josh Funk is for Vince. Vince, can you provide some specific examples of the safety concerns that PSR creates? I tend to describe the concerns as leaving workers spread especially thin after all the job cuts. Inspections are being rushed and preventative maintenance may be getting neglected. What else should we highlight about PSR?
Well, that's a good question. And it's also, I think the 3 points you have there, as far as workers being spread too thin and inspection cuts, I think that those are some of the worst things we have seen as far as when you get rid of inspections and you get rid of another thing that wasn't on your list is maintenance, just routine maintenance being cut. Really a sort of relentless drive towards automation in favor of people. We saw with the East Palestine accident, a focus on wayside detector technology, which is technology that measures the equipment as it's running down the rail, like the heat of the wheels, for example, or if there's dragging equipment as another type of detector. We are all for that sort of technology that's out there, but we also think that technology works best in concert with people who can actually get down on the ground and inspect trains, do the proper air tests on trains before they depart, and cars that need them when you pick them up. But PSR is really this sort of
Tienen que respetar, yo pienso, todo el trabajador, porque
I think that they have to respect all workers.
So PSR is really this sort of mob movie mentality where they take over a business and they put all this debt on it and then and extract all the profits and then burn the business to the ground. And I think that's for the insurance money. I think that it's really like it's a slash and burn sort of tactic, this PSR. They come in and they cut every single cost they can cut. Everything is about extracting more profit from the business. And we're living through that, and that's causing them to cut corners, to cut people. Between 2019 and 2020, they cut off 20,000 railroad workers. So it's really been an acute problem for us, and one we hope to see turn around. So I hope that answers Mr. Funk's question.
Thank you, Vince. And you have one more question here from Joe Maniscalco, Senior Editor, Work Bites. Follow-up question for Vince. Where do you stand, especially after East Palestine, on calls to nationalize the railroads?
That's a tough question. I mean, for me personally, I don't really have much of an opinion on that. I don't know that would solve the problems that it would seek to solve. it's not the problems that I see with the railroad is the fact that they're private versus national. I think there needs to be, before we get to something like nationalizing the railroads, I really do think we have to just get back to common sense safety regulations and not abandoning those, which is what happened, during the last presidential administration. They were very proud about deregulating industries that don't need deregulating. I mean, all of these, we say the regulations are written in blood, and that's why they're there, because somebody in the history of the regulatory action probably lost their life and a regulation came about. So before I think any of us would advocate nationalizing the railroads, we'd just say, why don't we have the railroads follow established rules that we've learned from many accidents over many years? I mean, we've all talked about East Palestine, but we've had so many accidents going back that we've learned so many lessons from. Let's not abandon what we've learned from past accidents that have led to common sense regulation.
Great, thank you. And I think that's about all the time we have for
I'm sorry,
questions.
we have a question from Katie with her hand up. Katie Johnson.
Katie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you. Yes, this is Katie Johnston from the Boston Globe. Alicia, I wanted to ask you, I'm so sorry about Lorna, and you had mentioned that that the company was supplying paper masks and then they took them away. And the company has said in a statement previously that they had N95 masks that were available to workers. I just wondered if you knew why that they took the masks away.
Nobody seems to know. They just decided it was probably for like a budget cut for all we know. My cousin was very like tiffed about it because she knew that she was in a bad, non-well ventilated area, to the point of where she was begging her stepdad to get the welders respirators, but they did not. They just stopped supplying. They said no more masks, where and they wouldn't even let people bring in their own form of mask. So it's like kind of setting people up for this situation. I mean, you're talking about a company that does a Zoom meeting investigation and gets reduced fines from OSHA. So it doesn't go to figure that they would take away just a basic paper mask because it's just a peculiar expense that they don't really want to budget in on.
Was that like a COVID thing that they had the masks, not a ventilation thing, or do you know?
I wouldn't know that one.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure because it was amidst the COVID, it was probably because of that, but they still shouldn't have taken away because COVID regulations didn't expire until this past like very end year. So that made no sense to me or my family.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. And again, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Thank you, Katie. Sorry that I missed your hand was up. Okay, so I think from there we'll pause now for questions. If any reporters have any follow-up questions, I'll drop my email in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me for follow-up, and I'll pass it back to Jessica.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa. And thank you to all our brave panelists for being with us today. We really appreciate your time and highlighting really the plight of workers across this country, and specifically employers who are not prioritizing safety and health and the well-being of workers. I just want to, again, thank also the team at National COSH for making this possible and releasing this report. I do want to invite everyone on here and make folks aware that our network of COSH affiliates and beyond are doing Worker Memorial Week's events all across the country this entire week. And if you are interested in learning more, participating, attending one of these local events, I invite you to visit our website, nationalcosh.org. In the Workers Memorial Week tab, there is a beautiful listing of events across the country being led by workers and advocates, calling attention to some of these safety injustices across the country that continue to harm families and communities. So that's one. The second piece I want to remind folks is that we are very active on all social media platforms, and I will invite everyone here that if you don't follow us, that you follow us at National Kosh, and we usually provide updates on our upcoming programs, latest information on actions, campaigns, and reports that are relevant to the U.S. workforce and to workers, and feature the work of our local Kosh affiliates. So we want to appreciate everyone for that follow. Finally, if you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the National Kosh staff. We're here to provide more information. And if we'd appreciate you also sharing the Dirty Dozen report among your organizations and network. It's a beautiful report. You will also see infographics, graphics with information on the latest details of the impact of worker health and safety in this country that you're welcome to share among your networks. So thanks everyone for tuning in and for joining us. Special shout out to our Kosh Network members on the call today. Thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank
Gracias
you.
a todos por participar, and thank you to our interpreters
Thank you.
for supporting our call today as usual.